I'd like to officially welcome you to tonight's program, Remembering Elijah Cummings. And we are very honored to have author James Dale with us and Dr. Maya Rockeymoore Cummings. And now I am going to hand things over to Regina, who's going to go over some of our resource and book shoutouts.
So the book we're talking about today is, of course, We're Better Than This, My Fight for the Future of Democracy by Elijah Cummings and author James Dale. That book is available in print at our library locations, and also you can read it online on Overdrive or through our Libby app. Also, we have a resource called Gale in Context through our website that you can find all sorts of biographies about all kinds of people, and there are several devoted to Elijah Cummings. So take a look at that, explore some of the biographies on there, and you'll find a lot of interesting information.
And now let's get to the great part. We're going to let James and Dr. Cummings talk to us a bit about the book and about Representative Cummings. So I'm going to turn my camera off, I'm going to turn my screen off and my microphone off, and I'd like to officially welcome you both. Thank you very much for being with us this evening.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Regina. We are delighted to be with Tampa, Hillsborough County. This has been, I think this is almost the last stop on a national tour that we've been on across the country, talking about We're Better Than This, My Fight for the Future of Our Democracy, written by my late husband, Elijah Cummings, in collaboration with Jim Dale. Now, I've got to tell you that Elijah was just a beautiful man with a beautiful spirit and a lot of stories. He had an incredible memory and could remember things from his childhood, and certainly stories that were very integral to his development in his young professional career and, of course, over the course of his career. And so, you know, we always talked about those stories in our household, and I encouraged him early in our marriage to put these stories down on paper, because I thought that it would be good for people to hear and to understand where he was coming from and why he held the views that he held. And so, you know, for years, we tried to get his book project off the ground, and it never just seemed to work out. Then one day I was having lunch with a friend, and I mentioned to her, I'm trying to find somebody to work with Elijah on his book. He's got an incredible story to tell, but I just can't seem to find a nice collaborator. And she said, I have just the person. He's a friend of mine, and I will introduce you to him, and he works with top-notch people. And so she introduced me to James Dale, and we hit it off, and then I introduced him to Elijah Cummings, and the rest is history. I've got to tell you that we've received a lot of accolades about this book. It just won an NAACP Achievement Award in the area of Best Literary Work, Nonfiction Debut Author. And I have a lot of people qualitatively telling me that, you know, when they read the book, people who knew Elijah said when they read the book, they can hear Elijah's voice. And I absolutely know that that was a testament to the skills of Jim Dale, his collaborator. And with that, my introduction to Jim Dale.
Thank you very much, Maya. And certainly I owe the opportunity to have met and worked with Elijah to Maya, who was our matchmaker and really was very skilled at putting the whole project together. And in fact, as you'll hear a little later on, is quite a writer herself and put together wrote the final chapter of the book after Elijah's passing. So as Maya indicated, I have been writing books like this one for many years, that is co-authoring with someone to help tell their story. But of all the books I've done, and there have been several, I've been very fortunate, but of all those books, I have to say that on a personal level, this book and this project, this particular collaboration was without any question the most meaningful and personally indelible experience of my writing life. And I don't say that lightly. I've had, as I said, many experiences. This one just hit me stronger and deeper and was a more meaningful experience. And I feel fortunate to have done it. And I'll tell you a little bit about process, and then I'm going to read a section from the book. In session after session that I had with Elijah, he would, as Maya indicated, he would tell me stories. And I began to formulate a structure in my mind, a sort of an interweaving of the formative moments of his past, this child of sharecroppers living in segregated neighborhoods, struggling in school, those stories forming the fabric of everything he was able to do in later life in Washington and Congress with presidents, the past informing the present and the future. Very early in our writing sessions, I asked Elijah if there was one story in his past that rose above the rest, that stood out as being the most formative in his life. And without hesitation, he recounted this experience, and I'm going to read an excerpt from it. When I was no more than 11 years old, my life was forever altered. I certainly didn't realize it at the time. I knew something important was happening, but it took a long while before the impact really hit me. We had a neighborhood community playground center where the kids would gather in the summer, with a small wading pool and some recreation counselors to watch over us. Our little wading pool was no more than a few feet across and very shallow, maybe up to your knees, filled with kids side by side. You had to take turns about a half hour at a time, and after the third group, the water was pretty dirty. But that was the only way we had to get cool on a hot day. And one day in late August, a lady came in and asked us kids, how would you like to go to a real swimming pool? One with a diving board, an Olympic-sized pool. Well, we all thought that would be great, but how is that going to happen? She said there was a pool like that only a few blocks away from where we were, in Riverside Park, and that we deserved to go there, and she was going to take us. She said, you can swim to your heart's delight. Those were her words almost 50 years ago. To your heart's delight. Her name was Juanita Jackson Mitchell. To us, she was just this nice lady who was going to take us to a real swimming pool. We didn't realize until later that she was a civil rights pioneer from a family of civil rights pioneers and the very first African-American woman to practice law in Maryland. Juanita Jackson Mitchell's mother was the inspirational Dr. Lily Jackson, who descended from a signer of the Declaration of Independence, but still had to attend the segregated colored high school. She rose to be president of the Baltimore branch of the NAACP, became an early leader in nonviolent protest, and was known as the Mother of Freedom. Her daughter, Juanita, was married to Clarence Mitchell Jr., a national leader in civil rights and lobbyist for the NAACP. And they, in turn, were parents of two state senators, Michael and Clarence III. Civil rights was practically the family business. What Mrs. Mitchell did not tell us that day about the nice pool she was taking us to was that it was totally segregated, no blacks allowed. She and her colleagues at the rec center, Jim Smith and Walter Black, were leading us on an integration march. There we were, a band of little kids walking down the streets of Baltimore, from a black neighborhood to a white neighborhood, only a few blocks from each other, but worlds apart. Day after day, Juanita and Jim and Walter led about 30 of us, walking 10 or 15 blocks while an angry mob, not of other kids, but of grown white adults, yelled names at us, told us to go home, threw rocks and bricks at little kids. One of those rocks struck me in the forehead and caused a scar that I carry to this day. The police watched and the newspapers took pictures and ran stories, but nobody stopped the angry residents, and nobody stopped us. We kids would swim in the Riverside Park pool each day and then leave, with neighbors yelling racial epithets and throwing debris and bottles, and white kids pushing black kids in the pool. Now, I call them neighbors ironically. Yes, we all lived within blocks of each other, but they were hardly neighborly. They were the opposite. They were people trying to keep us out of their neighborhood. Tensions were high. After taking Sunday off, they let us all back again on Monday, Labor Day. The hostility rising. About that time, the Riverside Park citizens, clinging to their segregated white enclave, must have finally realized that we were all going to just keep coming back, because they stopped coming to their doorways and out into the streets, shouting and throwing rocks. Just as Juanita Mitchell promised, we got to go to a real pool. And as she said, we swam to our heart's delight. Even as little children, we had a sense of victory and fear. We'd gone off to play every day, but we ended up making history. This was in the early 1960s, and the old rules and practices, and even prejudices, began to slowly but steadily change. Baltimore stayed largely segregated for the next 10 years, but it was the beginning, the root of what would evolve into a massive upheaval in social norms. Change. For me, it was the beginning of wanting to become somebody who could make things change. I saw that Mitchell and the other people who made integration happen were lawyers. So I wanted to be a lawyer. These lawyers were young men and women who had the courage to walk up the streets and have people yell at them and be unafraid, to have little kids following them, trusting and believing in them, to make change happen. I wasn't sure what a lawyer was, what their job was, but I saw what they could accomplish. My God, what a powerful force that could be. Change. Little black children getting what only white children had, because we were, after all, just kids, no matter what color, who wanted the same chances in life, the chance to swim in a pool, the chance to go to a good school, or live in a nice neighborhood, or see a better world. I wanted to be part of that change, and I have endeavored to do so ever since, and I have pursued it ever since. As for progress in achieving change, here's a fitting postscript. 30 years later, a man came up and identified himself as one of those in the angry mob and told me he was sorry. What is the right response to justice acknowledged, but so long delayed? I did not applaud his admission, nor did I spurn it. I said, apology accepted. Well, Elijah told me that he never forgot the swimming pool incident. It was formative. He said he often called upon the memory of it to fuel his actions in Washington. When he conducted hearings on the Trump immigration policies, separating mothers and children, putting them in cages, telling them to go back where they came from. When Trump launched his Twitter attack on Cummings' beloved hometown as a disgusting rat and rodent-infested mess. When Elijah answered ABC's George Stephanopoulos' question, yes, Trump is a racist, no doubt about it. When Elijah walked the streets of Baltimore to calm his city after the senseless death of young Freddie Gray. At Freddie's funeral, when he asked those watching and listening, did you see him? Did you really see him? You see him in the casket and you see him on the news, but when he walked to school, when he played ball on his neighborhood team, when he sang in the choir, did you see him? Elijah Cummings decried the invisible black lives so often lost, never really seen. It was in stories like this, as the fabric that interwove his life and mission, that we made this book. Now Maya, his wife and partner, who wrote the last chapter of the book after Elijah's death, will talk about that final chapter, about his last messages to us, and how he would have felt as the most recent events in our country have unfolded. Maya.
Thank you, Jim. And your listeners or the viewers tonight should understand that, from that pool story, Elijah realized his dream. He went on to, in seventh grade, he was the first cohort of African American students to integrate Baltimore City public schools. And so, he went to a prestigious high school in Baltimore City called City College. And then he went on to graduate from Howard University, Phi Beta Kappa. He was also the student body president at Howard University, which is an incredible feat. When you read the book, you'll find out that he was also, designated as special education as a young man. So, his accomplishments are really just great. Then he went to the University of Maryland Law School, the same institution that just a few years earlier, the late Supreme Court Justice Thurgood Marshall had been denied attendance to. So Elijah was one of the first cohorts of African American students also in the University of Maryland Law School. And he graduated in 3 years, passed the bar on the first time, ended up becoming a state legislator, became the very first African American Speaker pro tem in the Maryland House of Delegates before being elected to U.S. Congress. And of course, rising to become the chair of the Congressional Black Caucus and then the chair of the Government Oversight and Reform Committee. So Elijah was just a really accomplished man. He was driven like nobody's business. and he was just absolutely incredible. And so I'm going to read kind of like a compilation from my section of the book, and then I'm going to bring us up to current times in terms of where we are, and then I'm going to open it up for questions and discussion. All right. After the Democrats regained the majority in the midterms, Elijah was the chairman of the Committee on Oversight and Reform. He was finally in a position to lead investigations and to set the agenda for hearings. But he was sober about the realities of the threats he and his committee would face from the Trump administration and congressional Republicans. Despite his pain, he threw himself into his work. Then, in late summer, just before his speech at the National Press Club, he took yet another bad turn and was readmitted to Johns Hopkins Hospital. The underlying suspicion was that the cancer had come back. Elijah was weaker than I'd seen him in years. A day before he was to give the speech, I asked if he intended to do it. He said, "Maya, I'll be there if I have to crawl." Elijah was so drained that when his aides maneuvered him to the podium, pale and unsteady, I thought he might drop. Then he looked at the crowd 4 or 5 times the size of what had been expected before his investigations into the administration, before the shootings in Dayton and El Paso, and before Trump's Twitter attack on Baltimore and Elijah. He looked at the crowd and you could see him become energized. He exhorted the audience to listen and, more important, to take action. He was passionate as only Elijah Cummings could be. The gathering of usually callous Washington media cheered and gave him a standing ovation. Exhausted and barely able to keep going, he went straight back to the hospital. During the next few weeks, he managed to continue vital work. He was on the phone with Nancy Pelosi, Adam Schiff, Jerry Nadler, and his staff. He read testimony. He reviewed the impeachment updates. He signed subpoenas. So many times I said, "Elijah, that's enough already." And he would say, "Okay, I'll stop soon." Doctors at Hopkins and NIH monitored his cancer. It was obviously recurring, but the question was, could they do anything to slow it down or to limit it? We all did everything we could. There became, I think the best word is an inevitability to it. He knew, and I suspected, we were coming to the end. It was coming as if you could see it like a train approaching in the distance. When you're not sure how far away it is, but you know that it's steadily coming toward you. That's when he began to talk differently. He would say he was tired, no matter how much rest he got, just tired all the time. He complained of constant pain. It was clearly physical, but it was also emotional and spiritual. The inner Elijah was burning out. We talked about the past, what Elijah had done, and about the future and all that remained to be done. But we did not use the word death. We just knew. As it sped by his passing, events moved even faster in the days just after Elijah's death. On December 18, 2019, Speaker Nancy Pelosi banged the gavel and announced that the House of Representatives voted 230 to 197, strictly along party lines, to impeach President Donald J. Trump, the third president in the history of the United States to face impeachment charges. That evening, during her press conference, she spoke about Elijah. She honored him as a key force in the inquiry, calling him our North Star. And she quoted him, "When the history books are written about this tumultuous era, I want them to show that I was among those in the House of Representatives who stood up to lawlessness and tyranny." She added, he also said somewhat presciently, "When we're dancing with angels, the question will be, what did you do to make sure we kept our democracy intact?" We did all we could, Elijah. We passed the 2 articles of impeachment. The president is impeached. As I often told people in the days after his death, Elijah's death wasn't just my loss. It was our loss as a nation. And we all have the responsibility to move his legacy forward, because we know that with every transgression, every disregard for the Constitution, every attempt to act above the law, every denial of truth, our democracy is endangered. That's why in the months and years ahead, we must continue to hear Elijah's voice. We're better than this. We're better than this. Yes, we are. We must be. So you see, Elijah's words and deeds and his legacy were all very prescient, perhaps more so than any of us would have ever wished. Since his passing, we have lived through some historical moments that they will be writing about 200 years from now. From the first impeachment charges, to the partisan acquittal, to the COVID pandemic and the botched response, Trump's botched response. Elijah would not have been surprised by the response. To an ugly presidential campaign, mercifully to the election of Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, and to the claims of a stolen election by Trump and his loyalists that were unfounded, as proven by outrageous lawsuits that were claiming voter fraud. Every single one of those lawsuits were dismissed in courts across America, even by some Republican conservative judicial appointees, some even appointed by Trump. They denied the president's election lies, and even stalwarts like Bill Barr and Chris Christie rejected the fraud claims. There were unfortunately over 100 members of the US Congress, all Republican, who moved to overturn the Electoral College votes for Biden and Harris. And Trump, we saw, even turned on his own Vice President Pence and used his platform to incite a violent invasion of the US Capitol. This was an insurrection against our democracy. So, you know, people would have asked, and they have asked a lot, what would Elijah have thought? What would he have done? Have his worst fears come to pass? You know, we don't have to actually wonder what Elijah would have thought, because he tells us in the book. He says, quote, democracy literally means a government run by the people. People don't always agree, but to get anywhere, especially in the polarizing arena of politics, we have to find common ground, something to build trust and respect on. You also have to teach people that you have boundaries, bottom lines, things that you will not do, behaviors you will not put up with, places you will not go. As in a democracy, having our own checks and balances teaches our friends as well as our leaders what we will and will not accept. If Elijah had been alive on January 6th, he would have absolutely screamed from the top of his lungs that this is completely unacceptable. Donald Trump's actions and words, the actions and words of the people who came to the Capitol, and certainly things that have happened since that have continued along that vein. Certainly the actions and words of his Republican colleagues who sought to overturn the election results. And he certainly would have been completely upset about now the conservative effort to deny, restrict voting rights across the country. One of the book talks about one of the last things his mother said to him was, don't let them take away our right to vote. He knew where this was going because we've seen this playbook before. So with that, I would like to, you know, that's it. I'd like to invite conversation and dialogue. I welcome any conversation, and certainly Jim would be welcoming to talk about any aspect of the book writing process, or, you know, and I tend to be on the political side, and I don't want to say political. These were events that happened, and so this is history. And so we are talking about history. Okay.
Wonderful. Thank you. All right. So I'll let the audience know again, if you'd like to ask questions, there's a questions section you should see. If you're on a different device, you may have to open up the attendees section and click on the question mark to post your questions. But we do have some questions already coming in. And let's see. Let's read this first one here. Did Representative Cummings ever discuss what he would like his public legacy to be? And if not, what do you think he would want it to be?
Yeah. So I think that his public legacy is threefold. One, it's an example of values-based leadership. I mean, he led absolutely from his values. He was the son of preachers, the grandson of a preacher. Faith was the bedrock of his being. And he really kind of believed that you should vote your values, vote your conscience and your principles, and not in a way that limited the possibilities of humanity, but in a way that recognized the common value of our common humanity across backgrounds, across differences, while uplifting the possibilities of what this country can become. So one is values-based leadership. Two is a focus on being a bridge for youth. Elijah wanted this book to be, in addition to warning the American people about Mr. Trump, he wanted this book to be an inspiration to young people because he overcame poverty. He overcame being labeled special education. He overcame growing up in his young years in a segregated United States of America that had turned its backs on African Americans and attempted to keep them from voting and from, doing the various things in society. And he wanted young people to know that if he could overcome those kinds of obstacles to do what he did in life, that they can too. And then his third legacy is a defender of our democracy. Elijah was involved in some of the most sensitive and critical investigations into the Trump administration. And what he saw scared him to death. And he believed that Trump, used the judicial system to try to escape responsibility, that he did not have any regard for the US Constitution or our democracy or the voters who are supposed to be in charge of our democracy. And he feared deeply what the Trump administration and what Trump specifically would do if he got a second term. Now, while he did not anticipate January 6th, in the way that it happened, he did anticipate something tragic. And so, with that, I just want you all to know that I think one of the biggest legacies that Elijah has left behind has been one to be a respecter of our democracy, to urge everyone to defend our democracy. And he lived his life dying, using his last breath and energy to ensure that our democracy was protected, spending the last year of his life writing this book so that he could warn the American people. Elijah absolutely can claim defender of democracy and patriot as a legacy.
Thank you. All right, we have more questions in
Hold
here.
Go ahead. It's saying that my computer might go out of power. So let me fix this as you go to the next question.
Oh, sure. I think this one might be probably for both of you, but probably more directed to Jim. Can you tell us about the writing process when you're co-writing a book? Is it much different from when you are not collaborating with a subject?
Well, I'm almost always collaborating, so I've had a few exceptions. It's very interesting. It's what it requires is that you try to sublimate yourself, other than to keep your ear out to hear in terms of prioritizing what you're hearing, making sure that you not only hear your principal author, but that you figure out sort of what's most important, what goes where, and how to lead his or her story. It's about listening. And I sort of joke about this. We do these sessions, and sometimes I'm talking and talking and talking, and I think that the audience thinks, well, I must never listen. But when I'm working on the books like this, it's all about listening. I would often ask a question of Elijah, and then I wouldn't talk for the next 10 minutes, other than maybe for a clarification. Well, when did that happen or something? And it's not only hearing I think the important thing is it's not only hearing factually what the person is telling you, which is because that is frankly not that hard to do. It's hearing where their feelings are, what's important within what they say. I often said that Elijah gave me early clues as to what was important because he would repeat a phrase, not only to me, but I began to watch him publicly, and he would repeat a phrase and it would stir his crowd. And he also, if he wanted to make a point to you, he would use your name. And he'd say, Chris, I'm going to tell you something. And then he'd repeat, Chris, this is important. And so I listened for those clues. I listened for when he became emotional or when he was deconstructing an argument. And what you try to do over time is to channel that voice. And the voice isn't just the spoken voice, it's what's intended by it. You know, Elijah was a man in a hurry. And that was obvious to me in working with him. He was, I think, always in a hurry in his work from long before I ever knew him, but he then was in a hurry to save our democracy. He was in a hurry in a race with his own life because he knew that his life was, even when he didn't know the timing or that it was inevitable, he knew it was coming and that he had to get this message out, as Maya said, it almost sounds almost like, you know, like something out of an afternoon movie, but he believed part of his, the principal job he had was to defend democracy. Not very many people, regardless of what side of they may be on, I don't think there are very many people who feel their job is to defend democracy. It's a big job, and it puts you in a hurry when, especially when your health is fragile. So I've been trying to, back to where we started, I was trying to be the conduit of that voice.
All right. Thank you. I guess, yeah, this next question is kind of, I guess, asking about, as you said, he was aware that things were coming to a close for him. In that time, was he working with any specific groups? Obviously he had, you know, colleagues and people he was working with, but was there anyone in particular he was working with to kind of pick up the mantle, as it were, and kind of carry on his work?
Several, I think, Maya, you know, we talked about the young people that he gathered around him, the young, the congressional young people, not just, I don't just mean youth in general, but he embraced in 2018 when the Democrats took the House, and there were a bunch of young people newly elected, and some people, you know, sort of said, well, we'll wait and let them earn their stripes. And he went to Nancy Pelosi very early and he said, give them to me. And he felt, first of all, that they had a great deal of energy, a great deal of intelligence, a lot to offer. And the fact that they were new was not a negative, it was a positive. So, but I don't know if there was I don't think there was an individual. He said, you take the baton from me. It was more a group, I think.
So two things. One are the kids, the youth program, that he mentored through. I think that he viewed that as his legacy as well. The kids that came through the Elijah Cummings youth program as legacy holders, legacy keepers, young people who he mentored to become leaders in communities in Baltimore, but across the country as well. And so I think that's another example of his mentorship. And finally, I know usually people ask this question in conjunction with me because they want to know, you know, did he tell you to run for his seat? And that seems to be everybody's interest. What he told me on several occasions is he thought that I would be good for the position. And my husband and I talked so much about politics and policy and strategy and certainly the future. We shared so many of the same values and so many of the same perspectives when it came to the political arena. That, you know, in addition to being the love of my life, in addition to being my husband was my mentor. And I truly believe that when he told me that I would be good at the job, that he meant it.
Thank you. Well, someone is asking if you, Maya, have any plans to run for office again in the future.
I don't have any current plans to run for office in the future. I don't have
No?
any plans to run for office in the future. Does that mean that it won't happen? No. Does it mean that it couldn't happen? No. I'm just saying that I don't have any current plans.
Right. Okay. Let's see. We got another question here. There's lots of questions coming in. Keep them coming. These are great. Someone is wondering what Representative Cummings, as a leader, expressed to those individuals not on board with his ideas to eventually change their mind. Was there any special strategy he would use, or a common reply that you noticed?
Well, I'll start with this, Maya, and then you, if you would come in, because you saw it. I think perhaps his personal style, but he connected with people on a very personal level, regardless of politics, and that's why he had some, as people put it, some quote unquote unlikely friendships, people across the aisle, not only across the aisle, but way across, if there's such a thing, way across the aisle. But he had a friend, he would form a friendship. He had a sort of well-known friendship with Mark Meadows, who they couldn't have been further apart in terms of political views. But I think he was able to connect with people on a human level. And maybe initially, if he knew that your views and his views were polar opposites, he's not going to sit down with you and say that, very few people sit down with you and say magic words that change our minds, on whatever side you're on. But there often is, in that, once the conversation began, he would say he was looking for common ground. So if you have a 10% overlap, that's okay. Maybe you could get something done. He was looking for that. Even in his very first meeting with Trump, he thought maybe, he had this glimmer of hope. Maybe there were some areas where, as different as they might be on 80%, 90% of what they believed, maybe, and he thought initially there might be prescription drug costs, where they could find common ground. If you have that common ground and you do something, one little thing, then you might do the next thing.
That's true. That's absolutely true. He would, but he'd also say that it's not just about common ground, it's about higher ground. And what Elijah had the uncanny ability to do was to allow people to see the big picture. He would ask them to take themselves out of it. He would often say, it's not about you. It's not about me. This is about us. It's about our future. It's about our children. And so, he had just the ability to take people's ego out of it and help them see. And that's why I think Nancy Pelosi called him our North Star. Because whenever he was in a meeting of the Democratic caucus, or, that he had the ability to just inspire people. And I think it's because he could help them see the big picture.
Absolutely. All right. Someone is asking, you had mentioned earlier he was considered special education at an early age. This may be in the book, but someone is asking, was that because he operated mentally differently than a lot of the other kids around him?
He always said that it was because they said he talked too much. That they labeled him special education, and at the time it was called the third group. That they put him in the third group because he talked too much. And I presume that once he was in the third group, he didn't get the same curriculum content that the other students got. And so then he began to be portrayed as being developmentally slow. But, it's in the book, but I'm just going to tell you this little piece of the story. And that is that there's a wonderful story that when he was in the 6th grade, he was just like, he got frustrated. He was just like, look, I don't think I'm supposed to be here. And he went up to the teacher and asked to be changed and moved out of the third group. And the teacher was just like, well, if you want to be moved out of the third group, this is what you're going to have to do. And Elijah did everything the teacher asked him to, including going to the library after school every day to study extra material. And then he tested out of the third group. So, the fact of the matter is that, Elijah was even incredible as a young man, certainly doing serving as his own advocate for his future.
But you know, one of the things that he did, which was great, is because he had that experience, that special ed experience, he didn't just, first of all, as he said when he was telling me the story, he said some people would have hidden it, said, well, I got past it, I don't want to talk about it. And he did the opposite. He talked about it. He talked about it when he ran for office, and some of his advisors said, no, don't talk about that. He said, no, it's a reason to give kids hope. It's a reason to give an adult hope, to say, don't let that stand in your way. Look, here's what they told me. Here's what I did. Here's how I overcame it. This is a challenge, not a door shut. And he would use it over and over and over again. And it was highly effective.
Even in the policy arena, he talked about early in his congressional career, they were talking about whether they were going to pass a bill and how much money they were going to allocate to special education. And he spoke up and talked about his own experience, and that ended up being a tipping point for allocating, I think, more resources toward it. So he always viewed these issues that were challenges as an opportunity to be a learning lesson, a teaching lesson for certainly people around him and society at large.
Thank you. Someone is asking, and I'm going to read this question, and hopefully I'm asking it right. If I'm not, please let me know, and we'll try to get clarification. But so they say, I took note that we are not to be numb to the barrage of wrong, which struck a chord with me when reading the book. Can you give me more color on how Elijah Cummings spoke about this in interviews for the book, and how he might suggest citizens stay vigilant and vocal?
I want to make sure we understand this. Stay vigilant and vocal about recognizing wrong.
Yes.
Is that correct?
Yeah. You're not to be numb to the barrage of wrong.
Not to be numb to the, I see. Well, certainly, yes, I think I understand, because we certainly have been subject to a barrage that I think a lot of people have said, we now accept a certain level of things that we wouldn't have accepted a year ago, 2 years ago, 5 years ago. We say, oh, well, that's just that, in a sort of often attributed to to Trump, but other factors and forces as well. How do you stay vigilant to that? I don't know, Maya, what is the, I don't know that he had a method other than staying vigilant 24 hours a day.
So what Elijah had is what I call radical empathy. He had the ability to feel people, to feel people's situations, to feel their spirits, to feel their heart. And he brought that radical empathy to his work, his platform in the Congress. And, you could see it when he was up there wielding the gavel around issues like separating children, babies from their parents at the southern border. When he was talking about, a whole lot of different things that have happened, he would bring that passion to the forefront. And it was a gift. It was a gift, and it was also a burden. I think that the stress of always feeling people's pain had to have contributed to his health problems over the years, I think. But it's just about keeping your heart open. Now, I find, I just was telling somebody the other day that, I have had to emotionally distance, as I've gone through my grieving process, with all of the grief and the hurt that's going on across the country in order to get through this period and COVID. But, the whole notion of radical empathy, feeling other people's pain, is something that Elijah had, and many of us who are advocates have. Various people find their methods and strategies for coping with it, and we all have different strategies. But, I think that it's something that more of us should have.
Thank you. We got one more question. The main title of the book, of course, is We're Better Than This. In addition to bringing attention to serious challenges, is that phrase also meant to be optimistic?
Absolutely. Absolutely. It is. That's the beauty of that phrase, I think, that it says, in the moment, it may be something terrible happening and saying, we're better than this. But it's also saying, just sort of imagine what we can do. We're better than this, and we can, as he said, that we're here for our children. That's not, again, not a cliche, that's an action on his part. So We're Better Than This is an opportunity to say and show how. And sometimes we've had this barrage of negative, and my emotional bearing of my soul here is that in the recent times, I've had this glimmer of hope that we're seeing a little bit better, a little bit. I'm not ready to declare victory, but that optimism, if you will, has, that we're seeing little bits of possibility.
So Elijah meant it as both a rebuke, but also to be aspirational. That yes, we are better than this, and we can be better if we just do better. And that means that we don't hide our head in the sands. We don't accept lies from liars. We don't operate in bad faith. We don't work to take away the rights of US citizens. We recognize the value of our common humanity. We do everything we can to walk hand in hand in spite of our differences. That we have the ability as the United States of America to become a truly great, a truly better nation. But we've got to do better, and we can't accept mediocrity. Now, today, front page of Washington Post is an article about rising white supremacy and domestic terrorism in this country. There are also articles and papers across the country about, efforts to restrict voting rights in states across the country. And he would have absolutely rebuked all of this. But it's going to take good people with good hearts to say and to understand that our children in our nation deserves better than this. And so he was absolutely, through that title, encouraging us to reach for our higher angels and to not just, just to be aspirational and to do what we can, whatever we can, wherever we are, to have a better country.
It sort of goes back to that question on the vigilance. This is the two sides of that phrase, both the rebuke and the inspiration are you have to be vigilant to it, because there's threat constantly and there's opportunity constantly, and you must see it and do something.
Fantastic. Thank you. I'm going to go ahead and bring our screen back up, and I'm going to invite Regina back on. But these were all great questions, great commentary, and we're so thankful to have you both here with us. And I'll let Regina share some information here with our attendees.
If you have any questions or comments about our program today, you can contact us at hcplc.org/contact, or our number is 813-273-3652. And if you're interested in more programming like this or what else we have to offer, our library schedule is at hcplc.org/events. We're Better Than This was published by HarperCollins, and you can go to their website at harpercollins.com for more information about other books that they publish. And our giveaway books today were purchased from a local bookstore, the Oxford Exchange Bookstore, and you can go to their website at bookshop.org/shop/Oxford Exchange Bookstore.
All right. Well, I want to say thank you again to both Dr. Cummings and Jim for joining us this evening. This was a great program. We learned a lot, and just we learned how great of a person Elijah Cummings was. And I hope everyone enjoyed it. And with that, I'd like to wish everyone a great evening, and we'll see you all soon.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks so much. We enjoyed it.
Thank you. Bye.